the U.S. national interest is elsewhere, and that will be seen as a huge betrayal in Ukraine, justifiably so, by the way. But I just don't see Putin accepting a deal that is in any way palatable to the Ukrainians or the Europeans.
You're watching CapitalCosm. My name is Danny. It is August 13th, 2025, and my guest today is none other than Doomberg. Doomberg, thank you so much for coming back on the show, my friend.
Danny, always a pleasure.
Yeah, the pleasure is here as well. So let's just dive right in, Doomberg. Let's just get into the nitty-gritty. For you right now, what is the top story on your radar screen? Obviously, we have the big meeting in Alaska between President Putin and President Trump coming up on the 15th. But we've also have all this drama between the Fed and the White House and so many other things. So I'll let you take it whichever way you want to take it and set the stage.
Sure. Obviously, the historic meeting between Trump and President Putin of Russia on Friday in Alaska is by far, in a way, the most important story on the board. It could, and likely will, have substantial geopolitical ramifications for years and decades to come. I don't think that is hyperbole in any way. President Trump is playing an interesting game, trying to balance the forces that are putting pressure on him and his presidency. On the one side are the Europeans and Zelensky and the neocon wing in Washington, who believe the war should continue and that Russia should not gain any territorial advantage through military means, which is an odd thing to say, by the way. We can talk about that. And Trump's instinct to pull the U.S. out of the war, his internal, probably, belief that the war is lost. Really dramatic events unfolding this week in the Donbass. I'm sure you're following those as closely as we are. Don't think that's a coincidence. I think there's a convergence between the grinding war of attrition that Russia has been successfully operating and the need to show significant gains ahead of this summit. And in fact, that the summit's urgency is undoubtedly driven by the military situation on the ground.
What's going on in the Donbass, for those who don't know?
Yeah, the Russian military appears to have achieved a significant breakthrough, 10, 20 kilometers in one day, a couple of days ago. If you follow the various mapping projects online or on YouTube, you can see that there's a real sense of panic, frankly, amongst Ukrainian supporters. You don't have to look too far on Twitter. Some of the loudest pro-Ukrainian voices on Twitter are expressing such panic. It's unclear, what information is getting back to Zelensky, but it looks like the last lines of defense. There's a whole string of large cities in the southern Donbass that have been surrounded or partially surrounded. It looks bad for the soldiers who will be stuck in such cauldrons. I feel terrible for the soldiers of Ukraine who are the ultimate victims of this entire affair. Left to his own devices, Putin will achieve Russia's objectives militarily, perhaps much sooner than most people think. And so Trump goes to this meeting with substantial leverage. There is potential wildcards. It might be that Ukraine isn't even the top of the agenda for this summit. There's an enormous amount that Russia and the United States could do together. The U.S. national interest is, of course, the opposite of what has been occurring, which is driving Russia much closer to China. There's all manner of opportunities on the economic front, up in the Arctic, in the energy industry. But until this war comes to a conclusion, none of those things are really possible. There's probably a scenario where Trump negotiates an outcome with Putin, presents it to the Ukrainians and the Europeans who will balk at it, and then Trump washes his hands of the situation and walks away. That's probably how this will go. Hard to say. It's impossible to conceive that Trump would accept a deal that he could bring back to Russia that would be in any way, shape, or form acceptable to Ukraine and the Europeans. And so, as we've been saying on various podcasts and in some of our writing, the situation will end militarily. And it's just never really been in doubt since Ukraine's counteroffensive in 2023 failed, who would be the ultimate victor in this war of attrition? Russia's much larger. Its supply chains are right there. It has a very sophisticated military-industrial complex. It's outproducing NATO by a factor of 4. It is buttressed by North Korea, Iran, and China. It is basically impossible to inflict a conventional military defeat on a country as powerful as Russia, something that NATO has found out the hard way. Wars are hard to lose. I've said this on your show many times, but things are coming to an apex, and how this war ultimately ends could, in fact, reshape the future of the European Union, for example. There's serious questions about its viability in the aftermath of this war. So tons to talk about. Not sure which direction you want to take it, but that's obviously the most important story, the one we're following closely, the one that is driving geopolitics. It's driving a lot of emotion on social media. But nonetheless, the facts are what they are.
Yeah. Speaking of wild cards, don't you think that the biggest wild card is some sort of rogue group throwing a wrench into all this?
Sure.
Like Ukraine or someone from the European side who may not
Sure.
want the war to end between now
Sure.
and the 15th, or maybe even on the 15th.
Might be happening as we speak. False flag attacks is what you're referring to, right?
Mm-hmm.
There was a shelling of the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant earlier this week. Not sure if you saw that. The Russians accused the Ukrainians of shelling that nuclear power plant. That's always been a point of contention. Who owns that power plant? It's apparently the largest nuclear power plant in Europe. And so, of course, you have the Turk Stream pipeline and various other critical arteries that the Russians have accused Ukrainian operatives of trying to destroy. Ukraine is attacking Russian oil refining and exporting pumping facilities as we speak. I saw a report this morning. Zelensky has been calling every world leader who will pick up the phone in an attempt to derail the summit. I think it's an interesting thing. Wars are hard to lose. We did a presentation all the way back in April of last year called Sleepwalking to the Abyss, and I think slide 28 was like, how does NATO respond to losing this war? So it's not like this is something we've just come to conclude. Objective analysis tells us where things were headed, and here we are. And so, but Trump has significant pressure. The Lindsey Graham wing of the Washington, D.C. establishment is a powerful force for whatever reason. Heaven knows what the citizens of South Carolina care about who rules the Donbass, but Lindsey Graham seems to be dictating a fair bit of Trump's thinking on the matter. We'll see. I, for one, have no idea how Friday is going to unfold and how Trump will pull the political rabbit out of this very dangerous hat. But, one way or the other, two things are certain. It will be historic, and the initial reports will be inaccurate.
From Russia's standpoint, even if they are to take the Trump administration on good faith, what's stopping United States foreign policy come 3.5 years from now, should we get a Democratic administration or any other administration that is adversarial to Russia, completely do a 180 on this thing again? From that point of view, can Russia sign off on a long-lasting deal with a U.S. administration?
I don't know how. Of course, critics will say the reverse question is just as important. You can't trust Putin. He wants to occupy all of Europe. He's a madman. All the names that he is routinely called. I don't know, right? So when you listen to Russia talk, and far too few analysts in the West do, they have been steadfastly consistent in their demands ever since Putin's infamous speech in June of 2024, I think it was. And the key words they use are root causes of the conflict. It's not even really about territory per se. The root causes of the conflict is not something most in the West have actually studied. They think the war started in 2022, when in reality it started, practically a decade before that. And so, not only is Russia incapable of really trusting that the U.S. will keep Trump's word in his absence, there's also the whole issue of who rules Ukraine and who can sign off on such a deal in Ukraine, which is currently under martial law and hasn't had an election for several years. So I don't know that there is a diplomatic solution to this, Danny. That's why I'm so intrigued as to what will come out of Alaska. Clearly, the fact that Putin agreed to go tells you that the conversation between Putin and Witkoff must have produced some sort of a breakthrough. But the traditional, let's sign a treaty that passes the US Senate that obligates the US to behave in a certain way and Russia to behave in a certain way. So, for example, one of the rumors that we hear is that Russia will pass a law forbidding it from any offensive military action on any NATO countries. For example, now will the NATO countries believe that? Probably not. But that's an example of like it's a two-way street. It's not just can Russia trust, the short political cycle and the whiplash that comes with it in the United States, but can Europe trust Russia as well? Russia has so much territory. I don't know why it would want to occupy Europe. Lord knows there's little in the way of productive resources in those countries. It has more than enough commodities to feed its own economy. Last point I'll make is in a world where a temporary peace is achieved, one that even only lasts the remainder of the Trump administration, Russia will continue to rearm at a pace much faster than NATO. And with each passing day, it will become stronger and stronger and stronger, which is probably part of their thinking that in 3.5 years, if this lights off again, we'll just be in a stronger position militarily. So who knows? But it is, as an outsider, it is truly historic to see all of this unfold in real time.
What are the odds that one of the big topics come this Friday is Iran? Because Russia stands kind of somewhat in the middle between Iran and the United States. Could that be a major topic as well? And if so, what role could Russia play in mitigating a potential Iran conflict?
Yeah, it all depends on what Trump truly wants inside. Does Trump want to end the war in Ukraine, achieve peace in the Middle East, and avoid a war with China? Or is all of this theater to set up for an eventual conflict with China? There's an awful lot of talk in the Pentagon and in the think tanks around Washington, D.C. about the need to reorient away from Ukraine towards China. But if Trump wants a truly global peace, where three superpowers coexist, and the Western Hemisphere is in the U.S. sphere of influence, and the U.S. reindustrializes and becomes, a manufacturing superpower on par with China again, which it is not today, then there's a broader deal that could be the core of what's being discussed in Alaska. So, for example, Russia builds and sells among the most sophisticated nuclear power plants in the world. You'd be surprised how many countries have Russian nuclear power plants in them, or have ordered them, or are in the construction phase. One of those countries is Iran. Iran claims that its civilian nuclear industry is for such purposes and not for military purposes. Russia could take possession of Iran's enriched uranium, and it could agree to supply all the fuel that Iran needs for a fleet of civilian nuclear reactors. Whether that is, again, something that people would believe, whether Trump would be satisfied with that, whether the neocons would be satisfied with that. We framed all of this as sort of the next phase of World War III in a piece that we wrote last week called Crescendo. And our sort of hypothesis is that World War III started when Putin started dumping gold and dumping U.S. treasuries and buying gold. And so if that is the reality, well, then maybe Trump doesn't really want a peace because, the sanctions on India and Brazil are probably no coincidence. And so who knows? It all much depends. This has a certain, Kissinger and Saudi Arabia in the 1970s feel to it. Like it does feel like the next 20, 30, 40 years could be determined in the next few weeks.
And judging from the price action in the oil market appears to be buying into a peace settlement between Ukraine. At least that's my reading. If you feel differently, let me know. Yeah,
there's also just the undeniable physical supply abundance on the markets today. IEA, which is not an entity that we trust too much, was out with a call of an oil glut forming at the end of this year into 2026. We actually believe that is true for different reasons. There's also this just enormous supply of natural gas coming up. especially in the United States, to fund data centers. That was the subject of our piece this morning, Out with the Old. And so, there's just so many hydrocarbons floating around that it's hard to imagine oil keeps its current price levels if peace does break out, because even embedded within the current price is some geopolitical risk. That war breaks out in the Middle East. But in a world where Russian oil is welcome back to the market, friction-free. It never really left the market, but there's sort of a friction penalty to it. In a world where OPEC continues to defend its market share, in a world where Guyana doubles its production, in a world where Argentina doubles its production, in a world where natural gas becomes the dominant reason why people drill in the Permian instead of for oil, you'll just see the ultimate arbitrage of oil and gas prices converging on an energy content basis. Arbitrage is a real tough force to bet against. And so, yeah, oil markets, which by the way called the Iran-Israel war perfectly, seem to be pricing in peace as well, as you say.
Hey guys, quick pause from the podcast, but this is something I feel is really important to let you in on. Back in 2020, before I even started this channel, I was looking for an edge, a way to find the big opportunities most investors never even hear about. That's when I found Capitalist Exploits Insider. From day one, it felt like I suddenly had my own team of world-class market pros working for me, digging up trades all over the world, doing the deep research, and handing me ideas that had massive asymmetric upside. Stuff that I would never even think about. Since then, my gains with them have blown past the S&P and the NASDAQ, and it's honestly the single best newsletter I've ever subscribed to. And that's not me blowing smoke. That's for real. I've interviewed their publisher, Chris McIntosh, more times than I can count. In fact, my latest conversation with him is linked in the description box down below if you want to check that out, as well as the pinned comment. And every time, I'm reminded why I've stayed a member for years. Right now, they're offering a special $1,000 discount on the Insider subscription, but it's only for CapitalCosm viewers, so you're only going to get it by clicking the link down below in the description box or the pinned comment. You're not going to find this anywhere else. Click the link, lock it in, and start getting the same game-changing research I've been using since 2020. Yeah, it's very interesting to watch. You're also seeing gold move relatively sideways. No really big, massive price actions there. What other geopolitical hotspot? I mean, if you look back, you mentioned the Iran war. You recall back to the 12-day war, and the United States supplied Israel with a good number of their anti-ballistic missile weaponry. Recently came out that the United States was heavily depleted.
Yep.
There's barely any left. So how much of what happened there, i.e., it doesn't appear like we can serve both masters, be it Ukraine and Israel at the same time, and one had to be sacrificed for the other.
And barely. And what are we going to do over Taiwan, right? So, I mean, yeah, a fundamental axiom of our thinking it was, before the war broke out, by studying the Ukraine war, we came to the conclusion, which is not a controversial one, that the U.S. had severely depleted its air defense missiles. Trump said it on Air Force One. Rubio testified as much in front of Congress. Zelensky has been loudly asking for more air defense systems for months. The Russians have been systematically seeking out and destroying Patriot air defense missile systems with great success. You can just go on the open source and see the videos. Oh, look, there's a Patriot, drone spots a Patriot, Iskander missile blows up Patriot system. The U.S. can only make so many of these. There's something like a 5 or a 7 year backlog. And the Russians, through the war, have become better at circumventing the best of U.S. technology. And so the real shocker to us was just how depleted the U.S. THAAD missile systems were as a result of the war in Israel and Iran. So when that war broke out, to some controversy, I suppose, for people who don't follow things in the same way that we do, we were shocked, because we had written a piece last October called October Surprise, where we predicted there would be no war between Israel and Iran, because Iran held what amounted to mutually assured destruction. It could destroy Israel's electricity grid and its water systems and its natural gas fields with 12 targets. And if Iran is in possession of thousands of ballistic missiles, some of which are hypersonic and all of which have precision guidance features, there just isn't enough air defense missile systems to prevent Israel from being overwhelmed. So when that war broke out, we were shocked, and we immediately said to ourselves internally, because when you're wrong, it's kind of exciting. Like, what did we get wrong? What can we learn from it? We have no fear of being wrong. We like to be right, but wrong is where the right is found. We came to the conclusion that if this war was still going after day 3, Israel would lose. They cannot win a war of attrition. Iran's 20 times the population, huge land area, thousands of missiles, sophisticated country. And interestingly, the decapitation strike did not work. Such strikes rarely work, almost always backfire, but that's subject for another day. And no coincidence, on the 3rd or 4th day, Israel embarked upon a huge censorship campaign. Locked down all the information they could, but you could still find it. You could search, the foreign news sites and, various Telegram channels and Twitter handles, and you could see day 4, day 5, day 6, Iranian missiles getting through, hitting targets with high precision. The largest refinery in Israel took a beating, and we knew in the moment this can't go on. But anyway, the U.S. depleted something like 20% of its THAAD missiles in just 12 days, defending just Israel. That war couldn't go on, and so it had to stop. And to Trump's credit, he stopped it.
Yeah. And taking it back to Ukraine, if you were a betting man, what's your most likely outcome? Like, if you had to bet $1, what do you think transpires on Friday?
I think the U.S. cuts a deal with Putin that Europe and Ukraine rejects, and then the war ends on the battlefield. That's unfortunate. It's grisly. It's ugly. War is always a racket. It's going to destroy Ukraine as a country, at least as the country it was. There's all manner of war crimes being committed on both sides. I kind of think war crime is oxymoronic. Killing people is always a crime, but this is why we are anti-war. We're pro-peace. Others would call us, weak peaceniks. That's fine. But unfortunately, is that the two sides are so far apart. And by the two sides, I mean the Europe-Ukraine nexus and Russia, not necessarily Trump. I don't think Trump would really care all that much if he could just walk away from it politically. I think he's making a political calculation that he can't just walk away from it. The U.S. national interest is elsewhere, and that will be seen as a huge betrayal in Ukraine, but justifiably so, by the way. But I just don't see Putin accepting a deal that is in any way palatable to the Ukrainians or the Europeans. And when two sides are this far apart and already actively engaged in war, that's going to end. So I note with interest, like Donald Tusk was out, the Prime Minister of Poland or whatever his title is, drawing red lines. Europe will never accept a single inch of Ukrainian territory being taken by the Russians. It's like, well, red lines are enforced at the end of a barrel. Is Poland going to send troops into Ukraine to go fight Russia? I mean, I don't know how people think they can draw red lines when there's an active war going on. Like, this is the fascinating thing I alluded to earlier. I did some research on it. The Europeans are out saying we could never accept changing borders by force. Virtually every border that exists today was established by force. I mean, there's a few, like the Canadian and US border was mostly established peacefully, but find me a country whose borders weren't established at the end of a barrel. Even the United States itself came into being when, the US went to war with the people who were living here prior to the Europeans settling. The war with Mexico, right? I mean, sure, there's the occasional Alaska purchase, Louisiana purchase, but the borders of the Middle East and the rest of the world after World War II, World War I, like, military victors dictate borders. That's just the way it works. And might not be morally right, but might is right in every other sense. Like, let's see how Poland is going to kick the Russian troops out of Crimea. Like, good luck. And by the way, Russia has said they will use nuclear weapons. if they ever thought they were losing a conventional war. Why have nuclear weapons if you're not prepared to use them? This is why you don't get into conventional wars with nuclear powers if you can avoid it. So it's a sad situation. It's a disastrous situation. It's a crippling defeat for NATO. It might lead to the end of the European Union. But alas, this is where we are.
If the U.S. does indeed pull out, what real latitude does NATO sans the U.S. really have in continuing the war?
None.
Can they?
No.
I mean, can they even continue the war, even if they wanted to?
No. I mean, financially, the European Union is on the brink. They have no military-industrial complex to speak of. They have all of these grand ambitions to build one. This is where we get back to energy. I continue to be amazed at how powerful a predictor simple energy analysis is, and yet how few economic and geopolitical analysts consider it, which is, I suppose, why Doomberg has been successful. But you just look at Europe's energy bill and tell me how they're going to make bombs and tanks and aircrafts. So Statistical Review of World Energy lays it all out. They even pull out the European Union now, conveniently, as a separate line item in these global totals. So the European Union consumed 38 exajoules of hydrocarbons last year and produced a little less than 5. It means they imported 33 exajoules of hydrocarbon energy from around the world, paid everybody's bill, paid everybody's cost of capital in every supply chain needed to bring that fuel from the far-flung regions of the world into the European garden. And 33 exajoules is almost, the entire size of all of the U.S. natural gas production, which I think is like 37 exajoules, if I remember. That's an incredible mountain to climb. You can't have heavy industry. You just can't. And look, heavy industry is a derivative of your energy policy, and military might is a derivative of your heavy industry. Europe is deindustrializing. It cannot militarize. It cannot militarize unless it fixes its energy situation. Wind turbines and solar panels will not build tanks and ammunition and explosives and aircraft carriers and sophisticated aluminum composites. They don't have the jewels. It's impossible. It's all just happy talk. It's amazing to see the European Union walking around as though they're still relevant is shocking. They're so out of touch with the physics of the realities. Like, it's incredible. And I don't know how long it could go on. Like, there's huge movements within Europe to reject Brussels. This is why Brussels is clamping down on the internet. This is why the UK is clamping down on the internet. This is why parties are being outlawed and elections are being rigged. I mean, let's be honest, what happened in Romania was total theft of an election by Brussels, driven by France. History will have no doubt about what actually transpired in Romania. And it was all driven by the fact that NATO wants a base there. And so, there's a lot of sort of sovereign movements, let's call them, budding up all over Europe. Look, they're going to arrest Le Pen in the same way they tried Trump. All the same tricks: censorship, misinformation, disinformation, all of this nonsense will be tried. But I don't know how Brussels survives a military defeat on the scale that they're looking at in Ukraine.
Yeah, I mean, right now you're looking at the FPO, which is the right-wing party in Austria, polling first. You're looking at the RN party in France polling first, the AFD in Germany polling first, and the Reform in the UK, the Reform UK party polling first in the UK.
Yeah, that's before they put their hands on the vote counting scales.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure the real totals are much wider, and anybody who thinks that doesn't happen is just naive, of course. But the word democracy has undergone a semantic shift in Brussels. When they say our democracy, the emphasis is on our, not democracy, right? And so
our being the bureaucrats.
Correct. Democracy in Brussels means rule by Brussels. And anybody who thinks otherwise just doesn't understand what's going on. And I don't think it's sustainable. You can't be a flaccid energy vassal masquerading as a relevant military power that people should listen to for very long.
And if these people were any wise, they would just let these sovereign parties naturally spring up and burn themselves out. But by keeping an artificial lid on things, they're creating like this coiled spring, and
the technical phrase is the Streisand effect, right?
Yeah.
Which we wrote about. You probably are familiar with the origin story of that, maybe not,
Mhm.
but it's kind of funny. Yeah, the Streisand effect is when you try to snuff out information and only shine a light on it by trying to do so, and that's kind of what's happening here. But to hear, Ursula von der Leyen speak, she just sounds so classically out of touch. Like the platitude to sense ratio is infinite, right?
Oh, and the hypocrisy. They were arresting this
Oh,
protester at the
yeah,
same time when she was saying, "Oh, if you're in Moscow, you get arrested for this."
yeah. As
As he was
somebody
getting
gets
arrested.
arrested right in front of her, like you couldn't make it up. If it was a skit on Saturday Night Live, you wouldn't believe it. It would be rejected for being too blatant. Let's have a bit more subtlety in our humor. It's insane. It's just crazy to watch. But again, it all comes back to disastrous energy policy, in my view. Like Europe, Germany in particular, deindustrialized. They chose to deindustrialize. They had a perfectly fine electricity grid, backstopped by coal and nuclear as baseload and natural gas as both baseload and dispatchable. Pipeline natural gas from Russia, dirt cheap. Nuclear paid for, marginal cost, practically free. And a sophisticated manufacturing export economic model funded by all of these beautiful mid-sized banks, capitalizing family-run businesses that have been around for a century or two. It was working. And why they chose self-destruction like this is truly one of the great mysteries of all time. And everything else, even what we're seeing now, is just really footnotes to that decision.
Yeah. Well, I think that's all I have for you today here, Doomberg, unless there's something else you'd like to talk about before you wrap up.
Only thing I'd like to talk about is go to Doomberg.com if you like what you heard. Even if you didn't like what you heard, it's okay to read things that you sometimes disagree with. Everything is at Doomberg.com, Danny. Always great. Love watching you grow. Was looking at your YouTube statistics the other day. Pretty impressive stuff. I know how hard it is to grow an audience as high quality and at the speed that you're doing it. So congratulations to you. I'm happy to have played a tiny part of it by being a regular guest and looking forward to coming back on.
I appreciate it, Doomberg. I don't know if you know this, and I don't know if many people know this, but you were actually my second ever guest that I had on my podcast. This before I had, this is when I had like less than 1,000 subs, and now we're sitting at 66,000.
Yeah.
Thankfully, and so I much appreciate it.
Oh, look, it's a great way to live, right? I mean, I always enjoy talking to you. You're clearly a smart guy, and I knew you would be successful. But we'll go on any podcast that is gracious enough to invite us on, and we try to treat a performance with 50 subscribers the same we would with 5 million. I think you just consistently give to this ecosystem, and it gives back to you, and you operate and hold yourself to the same standard, I know. And so it really is great to see people like you doing well.
I appreciate it, my friend. Well, all right, guys, if you enjoyed this podcast, drop us a like and comment, go Doomberg, go in the comment section. Also, be sure to check out Doomberg.com. And if you agreed with what we had to say today, let me know. And if you disagreed as well, also let me know. But let me know what you disagreed on and why you disagreed, because I do, in fact, read the comments, good or bad. So drop me your thoughts down below and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss another episode. And by commenting, subscribing, liking, doing all the YouTube stuff, it certainly does go a long way in helping this channel grow in the algorithm, be boosted in the algorithm. So a little bit certainly does go a long way, and I certainly appreciate it. And finally, check us out on Substack at CapitalCosm.substack.com to get early access, ad-free versions, and uncensored versions of all of my content, as well as the opportunity to ask any one of my future guests questions and make guest recommendations down the road. So with all that said, I'll catch you next time. Bye.